you and I both watched the Alex Smith, I think it was called Project 11 that ESPN did over the pandemic. It aired or several months ago, and it was really incredible because it told us about the physical hardships that he had. Even though we knew it was crazy, we knew his career we thought was over at the time, it was even more clear about exactly how bad the injury was. I remember at the time, Eric Branch, who covers the Niners, made a point to point out that when you watch the Alex Smith doc, it said viewer discretion advised. Like, that's not usually typical for. I mean, the injury photos were just stunning. I think for me in my life, having watched his entire career, right at an age when I could process it, it's one of the most mentally tough, physically tough combinations of a pro career that I've ever seen. Given how easily he could have busted and been out of the league, and then definitely how easily he could not have come back at the end.
Yeah, I think it shows you, it's just a good life lesson that some things are out of your control. And obviously the industry he's in football, they select you, you don't select them, right? When he got drafted to the 49ers, it's easy. I mean, we have multiple administrations since that time that took the team to the Super Bowl, so you can just kind of get lost in translation. You and I were a couple years into college, and I stopped paying attention to them because they became such a joke. The running theme was, do you remember that the USC Trojans could beat the Niners? And then it was like, oh, could they sign Pete Carroll and Matt Leinart? And neither guy wanted to come. And it was like Matt Leinart went back in the draft. Now it turns out Matt Leinart was like a way better version of like Matt Barkley, but he was probably not a number one overall pick. But still, like, Pete Carroll did not want the Niners job. I just remember that being a theme in college. And looking back, no, he didn't. Like, USC, it all worked out for Pete. The Niners were just a laughingstock. And looking back, Mike Nolan was the head coach, who might be an all-time fraud. I mean, I'm not trying to be an asshole here, but like, just look last year with the Cowboys. Like, he might have just benefited right place, right time. He was an assistant coach on the Ravens that, I don't know, had some of the greatest players in the history of football on defense. Like, Rex Ryan was a part of that staff too. As it aged, like, Rex Ryan knows what he's talking about with defense. And, as a head coach, took the Jets to a couple AFC championships. Like, say what you want about Rex. Rex and Mike Nolan have little to nothing in common. And Mike Nolan tanked the franchise. Now, part of it was Jed's parents, because at the time, Jed was not, quote unquote, like, his parents didn't put him in charge. It was like Denise, or not, yeah, and Dr. York. And it was a disaster. That was a really, really ugly stretch. And somehow, like, Puig coming to America fighting sharks, like, Alex just fucking prevailed and just stayed, kept his head above water. I'll never forget Harbaugh's first year, and he convinced him to come back, because when I was with the Eagles, we tried to sign him as a backup quarterback.
Well, he was a free agent running, remember, lockout workouts.
Andy Reid loved him.
You tried to get him on the Dream Team? Wasn't that the Dream Team year?
Yeah, offered him $5 million to be the backup.
So if Vince Young if Alex had signed, Vince Young never would have come and called it the Dream Team.
Nope, never would have happened. And Alex, who knows? Maybe Andy, just with Alex there, we had talent on offense. Vince Young was terrible. It was a disaster. Now, it shows you how it kind of worked out. Andy got his guy. They beat the Detroit Lions in a game, the game where Bob Lang fights off Schwartz and Harbaugh. And Harbaugh gives this incredible. And remember, post-game speeches with the Niners were going viral at the time. Who's got it better than us? Clap hands, shake hands. Like, he just had these. He was a tornado of content for NFL.
What was the name of the guy that did the song? Remember the rap song, Who's Got It Better Than Us?
Oh, I don't know.
Such a good song.
And Harbaugh looks at Alex. And Alex, remember, during this winning streak, when the team started playing pretty well, they ended up being the number one overall seed. Alex is throwing for like 180 yards a game. It was not like 300 yards. Like, you go back and look at the stats of that first year with Harbaugh, it was not eye-opening stats. And he goes, Alex, clutch! That was clutch! Alex made like one throw and like the final drive, that went through. But it was just this tornado, and then obviously everything that happened with Kaepernick the next year. But That to me, that Niners, for as cool as everything that happened with Kansas City, and he just kind of got to get his credibility as an NFL player.
Yeah.
Now, I'd argue the credibility came with Harbaugh. The validation came with Andy when he became a good player, but like it finally worked out for him with the Niners, right? That was a cool year and a half. And
No
then he
doubt.
ultimately kind of got Wally pipped by Kaepernick, and they end up with the Super Bowl. And I think he talks about that in the documentary, how it wasn't easy. Maybe that was somewhere else I saw him talking about. I mean, it was tough. It was Graham Bessinger. It was Graham Bessinger
Oh,
when he
okay.
talks about he talked about getting like playing the best football he'd ever had, and then he gets benched.
It might have been that interview, or maybe it was the doc. Maybe it was in both. To me,
Graham's
one
got
of
a
the most
great guest booker.
he does. That he knew he's like, I didn't know a lot, but I knew this is not how successful places operate. That the culture was not healthy. The whole culture of the building. That's what he said. It wasn't like bad locker room. He said the whole culture of the building. That might have been the Graham interview.
Same deal. It was like a 7-minute soliloquy on it.
And it was like, whoa. And I think one of the most, especially now with hindsight, embarrassing displays I've ever seen from a football coach. And maybe this is one of, I'm sure Andy Reid liked him for a lot of reasons, but remember the Niners were playing the Eagles on Sunday Night Football in 2010. Eagles-Niners. And Singletary gets into a shouting match, and the crowd's chanting for David Carr, and Singletary gets Carr warming up as the crowd is chanting, "We want Carr." And afterwards, Singletary basically said, I was challenging Alex to see if he had it in him. And it's like, the fuck he did have. Like, you bet. Yes, Alex, nobody has ever doubted that Alex Smith had it in him. That, to me, was one of the most... Remember, Alex played. Like, David didn't come in. It was just like, let's get him warmed up to see how Alex reacts. Like, what are you doing to this guy? The guy had 3 head coaches. In 7 seasons, he had 7 offensive coordinators. And he still finished his Niners career the way he finished it. And then he had his Chiefs run. And then he has what should have been the knockout punch. And then not only does he come back from this, like, you know, he's got to go to Texas to go to where soldiers who have had their legs blown off rehab. Not only does he come back from, I thought, you know, you start talking like, is he ever going to come back? And my thought was like, yeah, he'll come back, take a knee, hold the ball in the air, and that'll be his final football moment. Like, he made it back to the field. But that's not what happened. Like, he actually played. I don't have any point of reference to compare this to. I just know if he had never gotten hurt, he had already had one of the most impressive quarterback careers I'd seen, given the amount of dysfunction he had to overcome.
Guy, he went to Washington when Andy traded him there, and I don't think it was easy. It just one of those things, they didn't have a choice, you know, with Mahomes. I mean, they made the right decision. They were 6-2 when he got hurt. Like, the Washington football team at the time, they were the Redskins, were a disaster. They got Alex Smith, and they were winning. Like, they would have been a playoff team if Alex never gets hurt. I also think the best part about Alex's career is that he had the little taste with Harbaugh and, like, played in the big games, played that NFC Championship game against Eli, which the only guy that's tougher now. I mean, Eli's performance in that game was legendary, right? I mean, Eli got the shit beat out of him. He just kept coming. That was a legendary game. Like, that was like Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. I'm kidding, but that was a heavyweight fight.
Hasn't happened yet.
It was cool, though, that for a 4-year stretch or 5-year stretch, he got to play in a ton of big games with Andy and the Chiefs. Like, their team was a playoff team basically every year. I think they missed it one year going 9-7. All he did was win. All he did was play in big games. They were going toe-to-toe. Rivers had some good teams. Obviously, Peyton Manning had some really good teams. He had one of the best games of his career, remember, against Andrew Luck in that playoff game, and they lost when the Chiefs' defense Luck threw that touchdown at the end. It was just incredible. It's one of the great wild card games of like the last decade. I can't remember the score, but if memory, it was like 45-40 or so. It was crazy. I mean, it was just this ultimate shootout, and Alex was unreal.
He was.
I think that would have been like 2014, maybe 2013. It was just an awesome game.
13.
Yeah, it was
13, 45-44. Alex was 30 of 46 for 4 touchdowns, 378 yards.
What was Luck?
29 of 45, so almost identical numbers. Okay, 30-46, 29-45, 443, 4 touchdowns, 3 picks.
What a game.
Alex also ran for 57 yards on 8 carries in that game. How about that?
I just think Alex.
Don't forget, John. Remember was that the year that he didn't throw a Dwayne Bowe caught a touchdown in that game. What was the year he didn't throw a touchdown to a passing touchdown to a receiver?
Might have been that year. Yeah, it might have been that year.
Dwayne
Because remember
Bowe
the
at
next year
8.
they signed Jeremy Maclin to like $40 million.
AJ Jenkins had a catch.
I saw you might have been at some of these games too, like in the Dennis Allen Raider games when Andy, like that team, like they weren't quite a Super Bowl contender because I don't think they had the high end, but they were one of those 10-11 win teams. If they played a bad team, they boat raced the Raiders. Like it was a joke. Remember, he was just throwing screen passes to Jamal. It was like, Is this practice? Because
was it 5 touchdowns and a half, or what was the?
It was stupid. I don't know. It was outrageous.
What was
they
that
ran just wheel routes. It was like whoop whoop. They were good. They had really good defense. I'm glad Alex had a pretty awesome. They must have tweeted something out because I was watching NFL Network. I guess I don't know where Andy said this publicly, but I think maybe they put a statement out, congratulating him on the career. Andy said, if he wants to become a coach, I get first dibs. That was like the quote.
That's a great quote. I know this. When the Niners are back to Alex Smith needs a day at a 49er home game.
He's made a lot of money. I mean, probably closer to 200 million than 100 million would be my guess on career earnings. I do think he'd probably be a really good coach because he's a high level guy. He's smart, but he's like serious. Honestly, he kind of has like a Lincoln Riley type vibe to him because he has this good look, but he's also like really serious. He's not a screw around guy. What would you guess his career earnings are?
Yeah, I mean, he was a first round pick back when first round picks got free agency money, right?
He signed multiple deals in Kansas City, and then he signed a pretty big deal in Washington. Maybe 200 is pretty high. And maybe I'll go because he didn't sign a huge contract. I'll go 127.
I'm gonna go higher than that. I'm gonna go like 180. I think
he was making 20. Yeah,
he was a quarterback in the modern NFL too.
Yeah, starter for 15 years, 120, 140.
Let's see, 16 years.
Long time.
John, if he averaged 10 million a year, there's 160. Yeah, and he didn't average 10 a year.
Yeah, you're right. 210.
Yeah, that's.
You're right. 20s adds up when you get 10 years of 20, right?
I mean, John, his Washington contract was $55 million guaranteed at signing.
So what was their total?
It's got to be over 2. Hold on, looking. One. See, how do I add this up here? It's got a bunch of random numbers.
You just go to career earnings.
Where?
On Spot Track.
No, this says 180, not 190. But I think it's. Yeah, it says 190.
That's a decent chunk of change. So I was right. It was closer to 200 than it was 100.
Yeah.
And it was basically 200. That's a lot of money to become a coach, right?
But again, you're right. John, he didn't need the money.
I got 189,725.
Yeah.
Is that the number you got?
Yeah. He didn't need the money when he came back to prove that he could still play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think he's a football junkie.
Clearly loves it.
I think he's a junkie.
If he weren't hurt, would he still be playing? If he hadn't had the injury, do you think he'd be?
Yeah, 1 million. He'd be a starter in the NFL. Think about the coaches that swear by Alex. Urban Meyer, Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid. And I know this guy kind of became a joke, but I do think when he got him, I think Jay Gruden wasn't like laughed at.
I would guess. I think we could probably throw Ron Rivera on that boat. Would be my bet if we asked Ron.
Yeah.
Riverboat Ron.
How did Ron Rivera not respect the hell out of him? I think Ron was an Army brat growing up, wasn't he?
I think so.
To go through something like that.